Well, hello there, AP Huggers. All right, we are going to take care of a little bit of some Unit 6 notes here, pretty much near the beginning of the unit. Um, we may cover some of this in class, we may not. If we've covered it in class, then you're going to fast forward and get yourself to where we left off in the notes, because I'm starting off up here, all right? The influence of site and situation. You remember site and situation? That's going back to, well, I think all the way back to Unit 1. And so if you recall, site is that term that describes like the physical location right around a place. And then situation is a reference to areas that are kind of nearby or adjacent to that place. And so way back in the day, I think when we talked about site and situation, we talked about Seton, the very ground that the school sits on, and just kind of the geography around the school, which, kind of tends to be a bit flat, but that is the geography. And then situation is where we can then kind of compare it, that we're nearby Costco, we're nearby the storage center across the street, little industrial area that's off to the other side of us. That all describes situation, all right? And site and situation plays a really big role in determining where, kind of how cities function, what they can do, what they can't do, based on site and situation. And so we're going to dig in a little bit with that, and a little bit gets us into some history, kind of like we did with our Unit 5, and doing a little bit of the history of some of that agriculture, but we'll kind of jump into some of it here as well. So the very, very first, we go way back in time, all right? The Mesopotamians, all those kind of folks, way back, some of the original civilization hearths, okay? I'm still not going with hearths. City-states were some of those very first settlements that came to be. And kind of like the picture you see over there, pretty much it's kind of self-descriptive. You'd have a city in the center of the land that they were claiming, and then all a lot of times agricultural land around it. Together combined, they would refer to it as a city-state. And this was some of the first organized states that we see in early history, for connecting back to Unit 4. All right. So, and again, you've got some highlighting here because these all connect back in with your vocab sheet. But I'm also going to give you a little bit of a breakdown here in terms of some other elements to think about when we're thinking about that old term city-state, okay? So if we go back to the day when these were first forming, they were politically independent. So in other words, we could say that they had sovereignty. They had the ability to kind of control their own government and the way that they chose their leaders, those sorts of things. That was a characteristic of a city-state. Another one is this concept that was kind of evolving way back in these early days, these ancient civilizations, and that is that people just don't like hang out together. That people maybe have responsibilities that are bigger than just themselves. And as city-states developed, kind of evolved over time, they took on this idea that they had a responsibility to the people that lived within the city-state. And the leaders began to develop these ideas about, protecting their own people. And that's where you see like the city-state photographed up above, how they get that wall around it. That's protection. The picture down below, why they build that city-state kind of around a hill, is for self-defense, is for protection. And so, again, when we talk about site and situation, it's just not random. It's just not like, oh, let's build a city here. It's thinking about, location to water, and it's thinking about how it'd be, best able to defend itself, things like that, because of, number 2, right? Another one is that regardless, of people's best efforts, it didn't take long for warfare to start breaking out amongst some of these first ancient civilizations in these city-states. Usually, it had to do with competition for land. Maybe one city-state seeing another city-state that seemed to have a better developed, maybe better architecture, better buildings, something that they want, something that they envy, and so the history of city-states, unfortunately, is also kind of the history of warfare that takes place between some of them. Just another reminder that that kind of conflict has been with us pretty much since the beginning of time. All right. So again, going back to that hearth term, another one that we're recycling from earlier units. And so when we talk about urban hearths, this is usually some of the main geographic locations where we see these city-states first begin to develop and where they're located. And so we'll run through the list here. I mentioned Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, which really translates into the land between two rivers, and those two rivers are the Tigris and Euphrates. Those are the big rivers you see on the map there, and rivers that still flow through the middle of Iraq. And that is where one of these matter of fact, most historians and archaeologists and anthropologists say that that Mesopotamia usually gets credit for being the original. Okay, it's like the OG city-state, if I am going to put it that way. Okay, theirs may have been the first. Another one would be over in Egypt. So from Iraq, you'd be heading a little bit further to the west to kind of a little bit northeastern Africa. And you'll notice also another city-state that is going to form along a river system, showing us right away that when it came to site and situation, being near a water source was always critical, always important. So you're going to be able to use that for irrigation for your crops. Okay, connecting back to Unit 5. Okay, it all comes together, right? But that is another of our urban, I almost said it, urban hearths. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? We've had the Indus River Valley, which is in present-day Pakistan, kind of between kind of bordering there with India, and so another one again located near the water source. All right, and then let's see. I thought I had another one here. There we go. Yes, sometimes referred to as the Yellow River civilization or Huanghe floodplain. They're both describing the same thing, and they both are built along the Yellow River in China, and considered to be another one of those hearths that we could throw in the mix. I don't have it on my list, but you'll see some sources, and you can probably add over into your left column. Is just to describe. It's a little more general, but to refer to the Americas. Because there were some civilizations, the Olmec in Central America. There were some civilizations that might not have been built right alongside a river, but maybe nearby, either the Pacific Ocean or the Caribbean, that sort of thing. And so some historians also add, and some geographers add that fifth location, the Americas, as being another urban hearth. Okay, all right, moving it along here. Jumping back into what we were talking about before, our characteristics. Another characteristic of those city-states is they usually begin to specialize. Again, this is stretching over time. This is not something right away. Okay, we finished our city-state. What are we going to specialize in? No. This kind of happens a little bit more naturally over time. And so some of those city-states will be a little bit more inventive, and not that they're building factories, but maybe there's a little bit more manufacturing or production being done in some city-states. Some of them are really going to lean into how effectively they administer the state. And so they may focus a little bit more on their government systems and kind of creating bureaucracies, little departments, all that. Some of them are going to have a strong religious significance and will be seen as a religious center. And then others might focus more on military matters, especially when we talk about that conflict element, and may be more known for their military power. All right, so we see a lot of that specialization take place over time, and then when we start stretching it out, from the early days, from ancient times on into the Middle Ages, on into the modern times, that's where we see some of these city-states, not always, but some of these city-states that develop over time and will become empires. Some of these empires will rise and then fall. Some of these are empires that will last for quite a long time and make their imprint in history by spreading bigger, making themselves larger, taking more territory, that sort of thing. All right, there we go. Little history lesson. Now, getting back into kind of more the kind of the nuts and bolts of really some of this other stuff that we gotta know here for Unit 6. So defining cities, all right? And yeah, there's going to be a good little jumble of some of this vocabulary coming at you. Um, a city is really just defined for you right there. I don't recall. I think I did put, actually, I think I do need to add that because I think I did add that to our vocab sheet. But yeah, it's just as simple as you see there. All right. Recognize boundaries so everyone understands, like, okay, that's where your city, that's where your city begins and that's where it ends. Maybe another city starts up after that, or you're starting to get into an unincorporated area or something like that. So yeah, it is legally defined, all right, and recognize boundaries. So the two biggies when it comes to defining a city, defining what a city is. All right, so a metropolitan area is kind of taking the concept of city and go on one larger. Okay, a lot of people kind of look at our little area of the Pacific Northwest, and they think about kind of Vancouver, Portland. Some kind of add maybe like up, a little further north, Longview. They look at all these cities and they notice how these cities all kind of run kind of one right after the other. Beaverton, that's right outside of Portland, and these can be described as metropolitan areas. Okay, up further north in Washington, you have Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia. That's kind of considered a metropolitan area. And so it's where you have cities, all of them have some populations. There's not necessarily a specific rule for metropolitan areas that I'm aware of. We'll get into some other ones that do have rules in terms of size. But it's when you have these kind of high density, a lot of people living in there kind of situations, and usually within close proximity to each other. Okay, and the map you see over there shows some metropolitan areas in different parts of the United States. And matter of fact, the ones we were just talking about, okay, there's kind of that Portland, Vancouver, and some of the other cities nearby, and then there's that Seattle, Portland, Tacoma up there. All right, Seattle, Portland, Tacoma. No, Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia. There we go. Get it straight, Floyd. Sorry, it's getting kind of late as I'm doing these. Just kind of, the night's got away from me, folks. Metro areas, sometimes you'll just see people, basically it's abbreviating, okay? Instead of all the syllables, yeah, just drop it down to metro area. It's describing the same thing. All right, so there we go. Metropolitan area. Here's where you'll also sometimes see metropolitan areas also being described in a different sort of way. And this is metropolitan statistical area. Here's where we start getting in some rules. When we start, it's one thing when we're talking about metropolitan, just talking about in general terms, metropolitan area. But now when we throw that statistical word in there, now we start getting some rules, all right? And so we're going to want to know the difference between them. And so here we go. So to be considered a metropolitan statistical area, you are going to have a population that is at least 50,000 or more. Okay. When we talk about a high social economic integration with an urban core and contains a nodal region, oh my goodness, folks. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here. So high social economic integration, which means that, in that metropolitan area, there's probably a lot of business that's going on between the different cities that fall within that range. There's also a high level of social interactivity going on. So, people who kind of go from one town to another, whether it's to, eat out or, other forms of entertainment. But people just don't stick to their one city. They take advantage of the other nearby cities. Okay. Just the way I, drive from Portland to Vancouver every day. And, sometimes I spend money when I'm up there in Vancouver, and some of you come down to Portland and spend money there because, have to pay taxes, that kind of stuff. Okay. So that's where you're getting into the social. You're also getting into the economic part of it there. And then urban core. That's where you actually have these downtown areas. So, downtown Portland, downtown Vancouver. That's usually what we're referring to as that urban core. And then when we go back to that concept of nodal region, that's going back to, again, we've covered some of this stuff, I think, going all the way back to Unit 1. And that is that whole idea that, there's higher level of all of that integration the closer you are into the urban core. and then the further on out you go from there, into maybe the suburbs and that sort of thing, it diminishes. It gets a little less. All right. And but that nodal region describes kind of that whole area where there's still, there's influence that kind of spreads around there, but it diminishes. It gets a little bit less the further out you go from the urban core. All right. Getting a little bit of our, distance decay kind of an idea going there. See, it's late, but I'm not totally lost. Micropolitan statistical area. Okay, so now metro, micro. This one hopefully not too difficult to kind of grasp, because micro, usually we think small. Okay, the microscope, all that kind of thing. And so yeah, a micropolitan statistical area. Same, everything else that applies up here, except now we're talking about less than 50,000. Okay, less than 50,000. Okay, let's see. Social. Oh, well, this is just pretty much when we talk about just that whole idea. We talked about, remember back in rural days. We're talking about how homogenous those communities are. Things are kind of the same. Not a lot of diversity. Okay, so remember, now if we're talking about urban and the theme of this unit, then we are going to be talking about the complete opposite of that. So, when we look in these cities, we look in these urban areas, we look at, metropolitan areas, metropolitan statistical areas, we're going to see a high level of social heterogeneity. Okay. And so that just means, there's higher levels of immigrants that are moving in. There's, you're likely to see more of a multicultural kind of a population. That diversity is going to show up in everything, like it says there. Everything from, race to the languages being spoken. You could lump in sexual orientation or identity into all of that. All those come into play when we talk about that term. All right. And yeah, there we go. To sum it all up, when we talk about cities, cities they kind of get reputations for kind of what they're known for, whether it is just how diverse they are, or maybe it's the food, or maybe it's cities kind of have those. Portland, I still see them all the time. I have one. I've just never had the guts to put it, but a bumper sticker that just says "Keep Portland Weird." Yeah, cities get their reputations, and some of that does have to do with just how big the cities are. Probably the bigger they are, the more likely they're going to have those reputations, or the social makeup of the cities. Okay, all right, and let's see. How much further I'm going to go on here? I told you guys, I was kind of thinking here. I'm not going to go too crazy on this. So transportation and the growth of cities. Well, tell you what, we'll just get a little start going on it, and we'll just kind of grab this right here, and there's that time-space compression again. These concepts, they keep coming back. Okay, and there's no get away from it, folks. When we look at the history of cities through time, and I'm talking about whether we're looking in Asia or Europe or here in the Americas. As time has gone on and we've had ways of improving our transportation, if that's going to throw you off on that word there, then write the whole thing out. Okay, I abbreviated, but if you're going to be later on going transp, then write it out. It's transportation. All right. And so, as we saw people, having to kind of hoof it around by foot or by using an animal, to eventually the invention of, steam engines and the locomotive and the steamboat. And then from there, the invention of the automobile, the airplane, all these kinds of things. With all of these, they have all facilitated the growth of cities and made it easier for cities to grow, made it easier for those cities to grow bigger, that kind of a concept. Okay. And I think, where do I end it here? Oh, yeah, the larger version of the map. If we're going to back up and get back there to metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas, this map does a pretty good job, although it's getting a little outdated. Need to get that kind of more newer version of it. But all the purple that you see on there is showing you all the metropolitan. Okay, and so you can see that whole east of the Mississippi. Holy cow, there's a whole lot of purple in there. And, again, going back to our history, I mean, that was the part of the country that kind of filled up first. And then you look out west, and it's still lots of empty areas, but there's a far more even mix of green to purple, which means you still have a lot of urban areas, but you have a far greater number of them that just tend to be, in that smaller size, that less than 50,000. But definitely, when you get down there, get down here in the Sun Belt area, where all those snowbirds are hanging out, and Southern California, of course, just high density population area, and holy cow, it is packed in there. And we do a pretty good job of it as well up here. You'll notice Clark County looks like it might be kind of in that green. So again, back in 2010, it still might have kind of in the Vancouver area been considered a micropolitan statistical area. I don't know. That one kind of, I would wonder how that's changed as population has continued to grow in the Vancouver area, especially. I know in the most recent census, numbers are still growing. So again, I need to find a better map, because something tells me that might be a little more purple, might be a little more light purple in that area. So anyhow, I think that's where we're going to wrap it up. We're at 20 minutes, give or take. Again, we might have got to some of this in class, we might not have. But that'll get you where we need to be. And when we get back together next week, we're going to jump right into and pick up where I left off on that whole concept about transportation and its linkage to the growth of cities. That's where we'll be headed next. And we're going to be just going to churning and burning next week on this stuff. So, all right, that'll take care of it for now. We'll see you next time, folks.